In April this year, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky asked US President Joe Biden to designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. Zelensky pointed out that there was a growing demand from US Republicans and Democrats themselves to do so. Syria, Iran, North Korea, and Cuba already bear the designation. Now there is a resolution in the US House of Representatives to add Russia to that list. But just what does the label mean? And will it have any impact upon Russia's war in Ukraine? India's former Foreign Secretary Kamal Sibal breaks it down for the Times of India. Will the US designate Russia a state sponsor of terrorism?
I don't think that they will do it because if they did it, they would lose more international support. You know, designating North Korea or Iran is one thing, but designating a permanent member of the Security Council is another thing. The other thing is that there are these UN designated terrorists, the whole UN system on how terrorists are to be designated. For example, there is the UN Resolution 1257, under which, by consensus, the UN Security Council has named several entities and individuals as terrorists. So there will be such a glaring contradiction if in the UN system you designate Russia as a terrorist country, and then you have also then to get Russia's consensus in terms of the implementation of Resolution 1527. The other thing, of course, is that if US declares a country as a terrorist state, then under the law, they are precluded from dealing with that country in any way. Now, is it possible for the United States to cut off diplomatic relations with Russia? Because that is what would be the consequences. You can't declare a country a terrorist state and still have diplomatic relations with it. So I don't think they'll do it.
What impact would it have on Russia if declared a terrorist state?
You know, they have declared Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism and North Korea. So they have no economic dealings with that country. That country is under sanctions, more and more sanctions. You know, in the case of Iran, their central bank has been sanctioned. The oil has been banned. Sale of oil supply of oil by Iran has been banned, and things like that. So they have done these things to Russia already. So what more can they do? Actually, in some ways, they have gone beyond what they've done with Iran in terms of the scope and depth of the sanctions. So I don't think that will make any material difference, except that United States, as I said earlier, would have to justify that decision and demonstrate that Russia is actually engaged in terrorist acts. But I can't see logically or rationally what they could point to in terms of Russia's involvement in terrorist acts.
If the US designates Russia a terror sponsor state, how would India balance relations?
But that's a unilateral decision by the United States. It has no sanction under international law. It's not as if Russia would be declared as terrorist state under any UN resolution or the UNGA resolution or what have you. So India is not obliged to follow any consequence of those sanctions or the declaration of Russia as a terrorist state. So it will be what the situation is at present. India is not following the US sanctions because they are not approved by the United Nations. And our policy is clear that any sanctions approved by the United Nations would be followed by India as a responsible member of the international community. But if these are unilateral sanctions, they have no force of law. except that the United States can then deny you access to their financial system, which means they start sanctioning you if they see you as violating those sanctions. Now, I don't think that the India-US relationship today is of a kind where there's any risk of any such action by the United States against India. We've just seen at the Tokyo summit that even with our differences over Russia and the Ukraine conflict, the Quad meeting and the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden has been very positive, productive.
Would sanctions on Russia hurt the US too?
It'll hurt US because they would then break diplomatic relations. They have to with Russia. So all channels of communication will break down. The embassies will be closed. There'll be no forum left for a dialogue. Though, of course, theoretically, even when North Korea was declared a terrorist state by United States, Trump still went and met Kim Jong-un. So it's not as if that totally precludes any conversation. But Russia is not North Korea. They are cooperating in space. They have disarmament agreements, which in Geneva last year, both countries agreed to extend, the start to, I think. So there is interest in the United States to maintain some kind of a dialogue on strategic stability between the two countries. So then, organizations like the G20 will break down because the United States won't be able to then participate in a forum in which Russia is present. So they have so many consequences down the line. So therefore, as I said earlier, I don't think that the United States would take that action.